At the height of World War II, American shipyards were bottlenecked, struggling to build cargo vessels fast enough to keep the Allied war machine running. At the time, it took 230 days to build a single Liberty ship, an essential lifeline for transporting troops, weapons, and supplies. Military planners were panicking. The clock was ticking, the seas were hostile, and the industrial process.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
I'm down to just 42 days with one ship, the SS Robert E. Peary, being fully built in under 5 days. Not kidding. 5 days. That's not just a record. That's a rewrite of industrial history. A man with zero maritime experience walked into one of the most complex manufacturing challenges of the century and didn't just compete, he blew the doors off the place. So what was Kaiser's trick? Turns out, it wasn't a secret weapon. It was a mindset. He didn't care how ships had always been built. He wasn't interested in tradition, prestige, or painstaking perfectionism. What he cared about was systems, efficiency, output, and speed. Instead of bowing to centuries-old shipbuilding techniques, Kaiser looked sideways to Detroit. Ford's assembly line revolution had transformed car manufacturing, and Kaiser was convinced the same principles could be scaled up. If America could churn out a Model T every 93 minutes, why not try that with ships? While traditional shipyards were locked into slow, sequential processes, meticulous, handcrafted, and rigid, Kaiser did the unthinkable. He broke the process apart. He modularized it. He introduced prefabrication. Instead of building the entire ship from start to finish in one place, he had different sections built simultaneously, then brought together like puzzle pieces. Multiple crews working at once. Parallel construction. Maximum throughput. And the biggest game changer, welding. At the time, ships were built with rivets, a labor-intensive, time-consuming method dating back to the 19th century. Kaiser tossed that out the window. Welding was faster, required fewer workers, and could be done by people who'd never stepped foot in a shipyard before. And that's exactly who he hired. Thousands of women, minorities, and workers with zero technical background poured into his Richmond shipyards. They weren't craftsmen. They didn't have marine engineering degrees. They weren't part of some elite labor guild. But with Kaiser's systems in place, they didn't have to be. He set up training programs that taught people the basics of welding and assembly in days. He simplified plans. He standardized components. He stripped out unnecessary complexity. And the result was a workforce that looked nothing like the old guard but outperformed them by miles. This wasn't just faster, it was revolutionary. Under his management, the average Liberty ship went from taking 230 days to just 42 days. That's not a typo. And remember the Robert E. Peary. That record-breaking ship was fully assembled in 4 days, 15 hours, and 26 minutes. Kaiser's methods made traditional shipbuilding look like a Victorian-era relic. His shipyards were producing nearly 2 ships a day. And by the time the war ended, over 2,700 Liberty ships had been built using his methods. The impact was immediate and massive. These ships became the backbone of Allied logistics. They carried cargo across treacherous waters, supplied forces on distant fronts, and kept entire nations fed and armed. Without Liberty ships, the war drags on. With them, the tide turns. And it wasn't just the speed, it was the scale. Kaiser proved that with the right system in place, physical limitations were irrelevant. Organizational capacity could be built fast. The only thing standing in the way of mass production was outdated thinking. He didn't just challenge conventional wisdom. He obliterated it. Shipbuilders laughed at him at first. Welding was seen as unreliable. Prefabrication? Too risky. Letting unskilled workers handle complex components? Unthinkable. But the results spoke for themselves. Kaiser's ships weren't just fast, they were strong, durable, efficient. His workforce wasn't just functional, it was thriving. And the old guard skepticism quickly gave way to government praise and industry-wide adoption. By the end of the war, his model became the blueprint. And when peace returned, the innovations didn't disappear. They spread. Kaiser's techniques influenced industries far beyond the shipyards. Housing construction, bridge building, pressure vessels, modular design, and welding became the new standard. His legacy extended across the Pacific, where countries like Japan and South Korea adapted and evolved his techniques to build their own industrial empires. Today, those nations are global leaders in shipbuilding. That lineage traces straight back to the Liberty ships and the man who dared to question everything about how they were built. But what really made Kaiser's story so radical wasn't just the engineering. It was the human factor.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Thousands of women entered industrial jobs for the first time. Minorities, long shut out of skilled trades, now had a path forward. Kaiser's yards didn't just build ships, they built opportunity. In doing so, he shattered the traditional labor hierarchy. Craftsmanship was no longer the domain of a select few. It became a process, a system, something scalable, something teachable, something that belonged to everyone. And that might be the most important part of the entire story. Because what Kaiser proved, what he demonstrated on a global scale, was that impossible is often just a matter of perception. A limitation of mindset, not mechanics. When the pressure's high and the stakes are real, systems matter more than tradition. Simplicity outpaces complexity. And ordinary people, when organized with purpose, can achieve extraordinary things. What started as a desperate wartime need became a masterclass in innovation. No supercomputers, no miracle alloys, no futuristic tech. Just a man who looked at a 230-day construction timeline and said, "No, we can do better." And then he did. Henry Kaiser didn't just change how ships were built, he changed who could build them, how fast they could be built, and why that mattered. His work became the template for modern industrial manufacturing. His belief in systems over status quo helped win a war. And his refusal to accept the way things have always been done unlocked a level of capacity no one thought possible. So next time you hear someone say something can't be done because it's always been done a certain way, think about a man with no shipbuilding experience who delivered 2 ships a day while the experts were still drawing up their plans. If you like this breakdown, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves underdog stories, and let us know in the comments what other overlooked innovators deserve their own spotlight. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the chaos behind history's biggest breakthroughs. The real kicker: Henry Kaiser never set out to be a hero. He wasn't chasing glory. He wasn't trying to upend an entire industry. He was a problem solver who saw the inefficiency and said, "Why not do it differently?" And that question changed everything. But let's not pretend this happened in a vacuum. The shipbuilding establishment didn't just step aside and welcome him with open arms. Far from it. They were offended. This was a club. And Kaiser, he didn't even have the right shoes to get past the velvet rope. You have to understand, shipbuilding was considered an elite trade. Generational, technical, incredibly complex. The idea that someone could just swoop in, reorganize the flow, and start producing ships in weeks, it was heretical. People were genuinely insulted by the audacity of it all. But what could they say when his results were staring them in the face? That's the thing about production. It's measurable. There's no way to spin it. You either get the ship in the water or you don't. And Henry Kaiser, he got ships in the water faster than anyone had ever seen. And not just 1 or 2 thousands. His Richmond shipyards became an industrial juggernaut, with over 90,000 people working at peak capacity. Let that number sink in. This was a small city dedicated entirely to the science of building Liberty ships. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't fancy. But it was fast. And that's what the war needed. Kaiser's yards ran around the clock. 3 shifts, 7 days a week, organized down to the minute. Components would roll in, pre-welded and pre-measured, and crews would lock them into place like an industrial orchestra, except this symphony was steel, sweat, and precision. And the ships, they weren't just thrown together. They worked. They hauled millions of tons of cargo across oceans, braving submarines and storms, helping win the logistical war that most people never saw. Because while battles were being fought on beaches, the real backbone of the effort was happening in factories like Kaiser's. His critics couldn't argue with that. They had to eat their words, and fast. The Navy, the government, even other manufacturers started adopting his techniques. The whole landscape shifted. Suddenly, efficiency was king. Systematization became the gold standard. The very people who dismissed him were now copying him. And he wasn't done. After proving he could outpace the establishment, Kaiser expanded. He started applying the same logic to other industries: healthcare, housing, even cars. He launched Kaiser Permanente to provide affordable health services to his workers, pioneering what would later become one of the largest managed care organizations in the country. But it all started with ships. And what made those ships different wasn't just the method, it was who built them. Kaiser took a massive gamble on hiring people that the rest of the country overlooked. Women, black workers, immigrants, people with no formal training. He saw their value not as liabilities, but as untapped potential. And when given the tools, the training, and the trust they delivered, this wasn't just about economics. It was about reimagining who got to be part of the industrial machine. Before Kaiser, shipyards were closed worlds. You needed years of apprenticeship, union connections, maybe a family name. But in his yards, the doors were open. If you could learn, you could build. That was it. This approach didn't just meet labor shortages, it redefined the workforce. The phrase Rosie the Riveter, that was his workforce. His shipyards became a national symbol of what was possible when you stop gatekeeping skill and start scaling it. And the ships kept coming. At the war's peak, Liberty ships were rolling off assembly lines at a rate that stunned even military planners. What once took nearly a year was now measured in days. And that insane production curve. It wasn't a fluke, it was design. It was the result of breaking down the problem into repeatable parts, of letting go of the idea that quality required slowness or complexity, of understanding that a simplified system, well run, can outperform even the most elegant craft. And yeah, let's talk about the elegance for a second. Were Liberty ships beautiful? Not really. They were boxy, awkward, and purely functional. They weren't built to be admired, they were built to work. And that's what made them powerful. Because for once, wartime production wasn't about prestige or engineering ego. It was about volume, about outcomes, and Henry Kaiser understood that in a way nobody else did. The truth is, a lot of people in power are allergic to simplicity. It threatens their expertise. It levels the playing field. And Kaiser's genius was that he didn't care. He didn't need to be the smartest man in the room, he just needed to build the ship faster than you. And when the war ended, he didn't vanish. His innovations stuck around. Kaiser's techniques were picked up by other countries, especially Japan and South Korea. Nations that, post-war, had to rebuild from the ground up looked at his model and said, "Yep, this works." And from there, they built shipbuilding giants that dominate to this day. Think about that. A guy with no shipbuilding credentials created a blueprint that helped launch global industries, not through some wild invention, but by rethinking process. And that's the core lesson here. It wasn't about the tools or the materials. It was about how you organize people, how you manage time, how you streamline effort. Because when you do that right, you can take an impossible 230-day task and crush it in under a week. Let's not forget, he was laughed at, dismissed. People said he didn't know what he was doing. And yet, by the end of it all, his shipyards had outproduced entire countries. That's not luck. That's vision. And maybe the most important part of this whole story is what it says about limitations. Because the only thing standing in the way of faster shipbuilding wasn't a lack of resources, or manpower, or materials. It was assumptions. Assumptions about who can work, about how long something should take, about how complex it has to be. And when someone finally challenged those assumptions, everything changed. Kaiser didn't bring a miracle solution, he brought a new way of thinking. And that turned out to be the most powerful tool of all. So, here's the question. How many other industries are still stuck in their old ways? How much potential is being wasted because someone hasn't come along and asked the most dangerous question of all, why? Why are we doing it this way? Why do we think it has to take this long? Why do we assume only experts can contribute? Because once you start asking those questions, you start to see the cracks in the system. And if you're bold enough, like Henry Kaiser was, you can rebuild it faster, stronger, and more inclusive than ever before. His legacy isn't just a bunch of ships, it's a challenge. To stop worshipping tradition for tradition's sake. To stop assuming that because something's hard, it can't be made easier. To stop gatekeeping innovation behind the curtain of how it's always been done. Kaiser proved that when you empower people, strip out the clutter, and let go of pride, you can change the world, one welded panel at a time. So next time you see something that's taking forever, some bloated process, some overcomplicated system, some broken pipeline, ask yourself, what would Henry Kaiser do? Probably tear the whole thing down and rebuild it in 5 days flat. The craziest part, Henry Kaiser didn't just transform one war effort. He rewired how the world thinks about scale. Because once the war was over, and the headlines stopped rolling in, you'd think maybe the industrial world would quietly fold Kaiser's methods into the background and go back to normal. But they couldn't. Not after what they'd seen. You can't unsee 5-day ships. You can't go back to 230-day timelines without asking some uncomfortable questions. Like, why are we still doing it this way? What are we clinging to? Pride, process, a fear of looking too simple. And this is where the legacy really hits you. Because post-war, the US wasn't the only one watching. Countries across the globe were rebuilding from rubble. Their cities were bombed out, their industries shattered, and they needed to get back on their feet fast. And guess whose blueprint they turned to? Japan, South Korea, nations that today dominate global shipbuilding. Their rise didn't happen in a vacuum. They studied Kaiser's systemized, prefabricated, high-speed approach and they ran with it. They refined it, perfected it, scaled it even further. So, in a strange twist, the man who once had no place in shipbuilding ended up reshaping the entire global hierarchy of it. That's the long tail of innovation. You start with one ship, then 100, then thousands, then decades later, your methods are still the industry standard. But what makes Kaiser's story so compelling, even beyond the historical impact, is the human part. He believed people were capable of more if you give them a system. Not talent, not genius, not years of schooling. Just a framework, a clear path, some tools, and the belief that anyone, from any background, can produce greatness if the structure is there to support them. That's the lesson most people miss. Because so much of industrial history celebrates the genius, the inventor, the elite engineer. But Kaiser, he flipped that on its head. His brilliance wasn't in doing the work himself, it was in building a machine around the work that regular people could run. And that's what made it unstoppable. He didn't worship the individual craftsman. He respected the collective output of a well-trained team. And that philosophy unlocked something no traditionalist ever could. Let's be real, what's more revolutionary than telling the world, you don't need to be an expert, you just need to be willing to learn? That's not just an innovation. That's a threat to every gatekeeping institution that builds walls around expertise. Because if you can train someone in a matter of days to build a massive ocean-going vessel, something that once required decades of trade experience, what else have we been overcomplicating? How many industries are still pretending they're too complex to streamline? How many fields are still clinging to the idea that progress has to be slow, elite, exclusive? Thanks so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, you're officially part of the small percentage of people who don't just click away, and that means a lot. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your ideas, or even what you'd like to see next. I read every single one of them, and your feedback genuinely shapes the direction of this channel. If you enjoyed the video, tap that like button, it tells YouTube this content is worth sharing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. We've got more exciting videos coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here for them. This channel is just getting started, and your support helps it grow faster than you realize. Thank you again for spending a part of your day here with me. Stay curious, stay motivated, and as always, take care of yourself. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.